and they are in the bottom of the Atlantic. The other 30% of 180 million, the 52 million they brought and put between Europe, the Caribbean, and the Americas. So now you add 180 million to already 86 and 17 and 59. Somebody just keep adding. And let me give you the definition of what they did. The act of inflicting systematic attacks and assaults upon individuals and places within human populations with the purpose of instilling fear and trauma. And what does that mean? Terrorism. We don't want to even mention what they did inside the Congo, inside the continent. We don't want to have to mention what they did in South Africa. The Afrikaners, the Boers who came from Germany into Africa, who systematically slaughtered and displaced and enslaved 39 million people in South Africa. Who were the natives? And held that position that they were a God-given population who had the right to dominate those heathens, and this was known as apartheid. And the world, the United Nations, accepted it all the way until how long ago? Just 8, 9, 10 years ago, apartheid was an acceptable form of government in the world, although it came out of what kind of action? The act of inflicting systematic attacks and assaults upon individuals and places within human populations with the purpose of instilling fear and trauma. What is that definition? And let's come to this good land of Australia. In case you Muslims who are immigrants, even if you immigrated 80 years ago, you're still an immigrant. Now I know you say, no, I'm Australian, I'm naturalized. But let me give you a little history, because I'm a history person. I'm a sociologist. And so I study these things to understand human behavior. I study them to understand the behavior, the development, the evolution of societies. And right outside your door, 50 miles in any given direction from Sydney, 50 miles in any given direction outside of Sydney, you can easily find, maybe not even 50 miles, you will find settlements of native people who are called Aboriginals. Very nice, complicated word, isn't it? Aboriginals. They are the people who own this land, have more right to this land than anyone else, according to the provisions of God. Not the provisions of the United Nations, not the provisions of those who came here, who displaced them systematically and replaced them systematically. Now today, I know the Aboriginals, they are a pitiful people. And we blame them now. We say, they drink grog all day. They shoot drugs all day. They are ignorant. They are dirty. They are lazy. They are shiftless. They don't want to change their condition. The opportunity is there for them like everybody else, but they don't want to change. And so, since they don't want to change, obviously they must deserve their condition. Who they have to blame? Nobody but themselves. We are taught that. Subhanallah. How can some people who have been systematically traumatized, their dignity ripped out of them, they are traumatized. They don't know who they are. They don't know where they are. Just for a moment, Muslims, take the time tonight or tomorrow, you and your children, if you dare and if you care, study what has happened to these people. Study what has happened to them, and you will cry. If you have any feeling inside of you as a Muslim, you will cry. You will hang your head down, and you will say to yourself, do I really deserve to be here in these people's place? Minimally, we Muslims here in this country, it should be our job to try and go to those Aboriginal people and offer Islam to them, because Islam may be the only thing that will bring them back from the trauma what has been done to them. And I believe that Allah is just and Islam is just, and Islam brought us here to introduce justice. How? In the form of da'wah. Because Islam have visited other places, and Muslims have visited other places in worse conditions than Australia and the Aboriginals. And it brought justice, and it brought light, and it brought inspiration. I remind you Muslims that some Muslims went to Indonesia. Some Muslim merchants went to Indonesia. And Indonesia, they were worshiping stones. They were filthy people, backwards people, oppressed people in the clutches of the Catholic Church. Confused, ignorant people who also had been oppressed and depressed and displaced. And some Muslim merchants went there and gave them da'wah. No Muslim army entered Indonesia. Only Muslims, merchants, doctors, engineers, people who were doing well and who had the feeling to give da'wah. And so what is the history today? What is Indonesia today? Your neighbor, who is every now and then flexing their muscles in this area. They are the largest Muslim state in the world. The largest population of Muslims in the world. This is a mu'jiza from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A mu'jiza, a phenomena. Yes, they have their problems, but at least they have Islam. Now here in Australia, the systematic destabilization of the Aborigines, 16 million of them. This was an act of inflicting systematic attacks and assaults upon individuals and places within human populations with the purpose of instilling fear and trauma and criminal occupation. What is the definition of that? Terrorism. We can go on and on. We're only talking about the last 200 years based upon the definition of Funkenwagner, Webster's, and Oxford. Their own definitions, not Khalid's definition. We can go to the land of India, where many of you find your roots. We can go to the land of China, not far from us. And between India and China, more than 86 million people have been systematically destabilized, liquefied, murdered, replaced in the same way. Through the act of inflicting systematic attacks and assaults upon individuals and places within human populations with the purpose of instilling fear and trauma. And what is that definition? And the Caribbean, and the Pacific Islands, and the Inquisition of Spain and Portugal, the South Sea Islands, and the Far East by the British, by the Americans, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, by the Spanish. In fact, this definition given by Oxford and Webster and Funkenwagner, the authorities in the English language, this definition, this technique, which is defined as what? Terrorism. This has been the historical choice, the historical methodology, and the preferred way of destabilizing and occupying foreign nations for the last 200 years, and no one ever called it terrorism. The United Nations, that was before called the League of Nations. Did you know that? They never defined any of these actions, any of these barbaric, tragic intrusions, criminal occupations, destabilizations, murder, and protracted crimes on humanity. They never called it what? Terrorism. Now let's go to the issue of, before we go to the issue of the suicide bombers and the freedom fighters who are called fanatics and extremists, let's first add up this, what has happened in the last 200 years. Did anybody keep count with me? Excuse me. How many? 487 million. That's 500 million people. I didn't say in jail. I didn't say oppressed. I said totally destabilized, eliminated, slaughtered, liquefied, or otherwise eradicated over a period of 200 years. Now that crime will be paid for because Allah is just. And that crime is being paid for. That crime is being paid for. In the Western world, which we are living, which has the highest standard of living, which is the most advanced, which has the highest level of education, which has the highest buildings, the most institutions, the most enjoyment, the most developed technology, the most preferred way of life, the most beautiful houses, the most diversified marketplaces, the Western world, the pearl of the earth where everybody is being called to. The Western world. Let me give you some statistics to show you how they are paying for it. The Western world that we're living in, every single hour, 106 children are aborted. That means they are murdered. 106 children are aborted every single hour, which means every 2 hours, every 3 hours, some 350 children are killed in the womb in the Western world. Every hour, 106. Every 24 hours, nearly 3,000